and we can go ahead and get started. Pam, I switch it over to you.
Hello, I am Pam Campbell, and you might have, I was looking at the chat, you might have to relink them because I don't see them here right now. So I want to make sure everybody gets those resources. So good evening, and I thank you, Heather. I do appreciate working with the OCSS board and its members and really value our long-standing relationship. And of course, I look forward to being part of the great programs and professional development in person when that's possible. So I'm Pam Campbell, the Public Affairs Director at the Oklahoma City branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. I've worked at the Fed for nearly 15 years, and we've been home, like many have, since March, and we'll continue working from home until June. I'm here with Leslie Baker, the other half of Public Affairs. I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. As Pam mentioned, I'm Leslie Baker. I have a mere 2 years under my belt at the Federal Reserve Bank, and I'm learning so much from all of you, and I am enjoying the opportunity to get out in front of people, regardless of whether it's live or virtual. We really do relish the opportunity to share with you all the resources that we have at our disposal for you. So Pam, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Oh, well, basically I do public outreach. So economic education and personal finance. I am that contact that you want to reach out to if you're looking for something specific. I can help you get there. So Pam, back to you.
Thanks. Well, we really appreciate those of you here today, and we're very excited to share this lesson with you because it's focused on a great Oklahoman, Robert L. Owen. Now, April 2nd of 2020 was the Oklahoma City branch Centennial. So as part of the Centennial celebration, we wanted to take this opportunity to educate you and your students about Robert L. Owen and his contributions to developing the Federal Reserve System. There are many other things about the Centennial that didn't quite go right because of the pandemic, but this we were able to do, and we're so excited to be able to share it with you. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Alexander Hamilton and might be able to sing the musical. Well, Hamilton developed the first central bank. And so I kind of think about Robert L. Owen as Oklahoma's Alexander Hamilton because he designed us, the Federal Reserve, the third central bank. And clearly his plan worked because the Fed system has been serving the country for 107 years. Now, what makes this Fed system work versus the first and second banks is the 12 banks and 25 branches that are spread across the country, which gives regional representation and opportunities for building relationships. So Leslie and I are part of the 10th Federal Reserve District, the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. And Kansas City is the main bank, and we have a 7-state region of Oklahoma, Kansas, western third of Missouri, Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, and the northern half of New Mexico. And you'll have to excuse my dogs that are shaking and doing all sorts of things in the background. So since we have such a large region, we have 3 branches, Oklahoma City, Denver, and Omaha. And so when you add us all together, we have about 2,200 employees representing the Kansas City Fed. Now, since its opening on August 2nd of 1920 with about 50 employees, the Oklahoma City branch has provided Oklahoma's local connection to the nation's central bank through its participation in each of the Fed's mission areas, which are financial services, regulation and supervision of financial institutions, and monetary policy. Now, our employees are part of a rich history and legacy of serving the state of Oklahoma for 100 years through our network of relationships with businesses and community banks to understand regional economic conditions. So today, we still have about 50 employees at the branch who analyze Oklahoma's economy in the energy sector. And if you may have met some of them if you've ever attended a Fed event. When we aren't in a pandemic, we love to host events at the Federal Reserve, including one we call Evening at the Fed, which is a professional development opportunity for educators. And Chad Wilkerson, who is our Oklahoma City branch executive and economist, he always speaks to make sense of the national and Oklahoma economy so you can break it down and explain it to your students. So in addition to Chad and his economics team, the majority of our staff are bank examiners that supervise financial institutions. And then we have our public outreach team, which is Leslie and I, who work on economic and financial education. And then we also have community development staff who focus on low to moderate income communities, small businesses, and workforce development. And together, we will continue to serve Oklahoma to make sure that voices are heard in Fed's policies discussions. And we've been privileged to do this for 100 years, and we're happy to continue for another 100 years. So like I said, now Leslie and I want to share this new resource with you, as well as a little bit about other resources that Fed has to help with your teaching. So I am going to pause a minute and figure out how to share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see that. I don't know, I can't see anybody to give me a thumbs up. So, so this lesson is What Makes a Senator? The Life and Legacy of Robert L. Owen. Now this lesson is the first inquiry-based lesson that we have written from the Kansas City Fed, and I want to give a shout out to Brenda Chapman and Sarah Dumas for their assistance in reviewing it and sharing their feedback. And on that note, Leslie and I are definitely open to more feedback and would like to hear your comments and thoughts. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about Robert L. Owen. So Robert Latham Owen, he was a frontier lawyer, banker, and businessman who had been chosen as one of Oklahoma's first 2 U.S. senators when the state was admitted to the Union in 1907. Owen was the Senate author of a bill that authorized the creation of the Federal Reserve System, including both a government agency in Washington, D.C., and the 12 semi-independent banks that I described earlier. Now, he was born in Lynchburg, Virginia in 1856. He was well educated. His father was actually the president of a railroad, and his family lived a very prominent life. And as Owen was finishing his preparatory education, his father's railroad was consolidated and he was forced to resign as president. Now keep in mind, at this time there was no central bank. It was in between the it was after the second central bank, and there were financial panics and no safety net. So Owen's father was heavily in debt, and there was a panic in 1873. In the middle of that year, he suddenly passed away. And records say that the family never really talked about it. So a lot of people draw conclusions that it could have been suicide, and he was only 48 years old. Later, Owen wrote that the value of my father's property was completely destroyed, and my mother, from a life of abundance, was suddenly compelled to earn her living by teaching music. And he was talking about the financial panic at the time. And that's one of those things that influenced kind of what he did later with the Federal Reserve Act. But Owen was a diligent student, and he was able to go to school on scholarships. And he worked so hard that he graduated with a master's degree in 3 years. Now, he was Cherokee from his mother's side, and even though he was only a 16th, he ran into a colleague who encouraged him to move to Indian Territory, of course now Oklahoma, because they heard there were opportunity for Cherokees there, which they were. He got his first job out of college, and he was the teacher and head of the Cherokee Orphan Asylum. He was paid $700 a year. And during that time over his life, you know, he was an attorney. He was the editor of a newspaper. He led a government agency as the Indian agent that oversaw the 5 civilized tribes. He was a lobbyist, a businessman, a banker, and then a U.S. senator. And I tell you all of this because it points to our compelling question in the lesson, which is, how do life experiences shape decisions and attitudes about one's beliefs? So as you can see here on the lesson that we also have correlated which Oklahoma's social studies standards that are covered in this lesson. So when you go to the next part, which is staging the question. So the teacher will begin by asking their students if they've heard of the Federal Reserve Bank and if they know what it is. And this lesson gives instructions on how to briefly explain the Fed, and then go to a link on the Oklahoma History Center website, which, by the way, a lot of our resources are from the Oklahoma History Center because they just have great primary resources there. And students can answer a question as they review the webpage and photo. So the question is, what types of events, economic or otherwise, might have influenced Robert L. Owen to create legislation that would protect the US economy, and what sorts of skills would he need to be successful? So this gets the students thinking about all the different types of skills people need for different jobs. And there's a link to introduce Robert L. Owen here that also lives on the Oklahoma History Center site, which gives a brief overview of his life. And here are the sources that I referred to, the pages that the students can evaluate and look at. So next is the first supporting question, which asks, what political and economic events in his life influenced Robert L. Owen through his time in Oklahoma Territory? And this is meant to let students get some basic background knowledge and get acclimated to the time and place we're discussing, as well as how people move and ended up in Oklahoma. First, the teacher will review some of the primary sources to give students context to Oklahoma Territory to this time period. And then the real activity in this section is giving the students the opportunity to study a primary source, the Daily Chieftain, taking notes about its content as they read. And the really cool thing about this is the students are reviewing a primary source and this is when Owen was actually the editor of this paper. So the students can pick and choose in the source how they answer this first supported question. And then they can compare the 1893 Daily Chieftain to a modern newspaper and discuss whether they believe that media has become more or less influenced by top politics over time and what factors they believe to have contributed in that. Then students could be in pairs, break up in teams or groups, and debate the influence of political topics on the media. And of course, you know, right now this is so relevant of what's going on in the media and how politics can manifest itself in the media. And these are some of the resources available. Like there's this one of Guthrie and what it looked like in Oklahoma Territory, as well as the Indian chieftain, like I mentioned. So before I move on, does anybody have any questions or discussion before I move on to the next supporting question? All right, well, I will keep on going. So the supporting question number 2 asks, what unique experiences did Robert L. Owen have as a lawyer in the Cherokee Nation that prepared him for his eventual career as a senator? So during the formative performance task, students have the opportunity to understand the landscape when Owen began his many careers, including taking a deeper dive about what it means to be a lawyer. So we begin this section with a simple activity that doesn't require any previous knowledge, and the teacher will just have the students brainstorm what they think it means to be a lawyer. And I think it'd be very interesting to hear, you know, students' comments about what they think being a lawyer is all about, because I have a feeling a lot of their frame of reference has to do with television shows. Now, Dr. Kenny Brown, who's retired from UCO, is the expert on Robert L. Owen, and one of the secondary sources provided points to his dissertation where he discusses Owen's life and time as an attorney. And it is a great read. It actually says that while he was an attorney, they literally fought in the courtroom, like literally hit each other. So very different being attorney than what necessarily we might think back then in the Oklahoma Territory. And so it would definitely be interesting to see how the students respond to what his life was like compared to what they think it would be now. And the point of that for students is that Robert L. Owen did live a unique life and had unique experience throughout his careers. And what this could illustrate to students, you know, how might these experiences match up with what the students thought about being a lawyer and his responsibilities during that time? You know, maybe being an attorney in such a rough and tumble time made him more effective as a U.S. Senator. So there's some great sources here one of them is the courtrooms in the territory at the time. And, you know, students can really look at the photos and see what kind of things they think about, you know, look at them closely, because, you know, a picture says so many things, and what is so striking there about them, and get a really discussion going on about the pictures. And then, of course, there's also a link to Dr. Brown's dissertation. So the final supporting question asks about Robert L. Owen's political beliefs and how they aligned or differed from attitudes of the time. So we're moving on from his career as a newspaperman and lawyer, and when he's starting to think about politics. So this begins a discussion about Owen being seen as a progressive politician. And the teacher can choose how much background to go in about the progressive era. Even though Robert L. Owen did not agree with every policy that was considered progressive, his thoughts on money and central banking to regulate the flow of money were similar to those held by notable progressive politicians of his era. And of course, there's some great featured sources with this question, including some political cartoons from the St. Louis Fed and Theodore Roosevelt Center that I think the students would really enjoy examining. And so then after having the students engage with the primary sources and go back, refer again to the secondary source of Dr. Brown's dissertation, you know, how are we going to tie this all together? So what you can do is have the students use a Venn diagram or a compare and contrast chart to compare Robert Owen's beliefs on things like bank regulation with the positions of other progressive politicians linked in the secondary source. And if there's time left, you could read the secondary source about Robert L. Owen, which is written by our Oklahoma City branch executive, Chad Wilkerson. And it talks about Owen's push on the Third Central Bank and kind of connects it all together with his experience in law, his experience as a newspaperman, and his experience in banking, and how it all gave him the idea to structure the Third Central Bank. And here are the sources for the one I was just referring to with the cartoons and things like that. Now this lesson could be done in a day, or you could split the questions into its own day and really do a deep dive into the sources. There is a summative assessment. And so if you want to check their knowledge, where students work together in groups and they'll determine the events in the lesson and that they believe in, and what they believe influenced Owen's beliefs and attitudes. And if you want to extend this even further, there are great resources on the Federal Reserve website that explain the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 in simple terms. You could go through step by step and talk about what economic events the Fed was created to help detour. And if you really want to take a deep dive into the Federal Reserve Act, we have another new lesson where students will examine the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and the establishment of the unique structure of and functions of the Federal Reserve System. And during this one, students describe how not having a central bank or the effective tools in place and precipitated a national response and resulted in the Federal Reserve Act as we know it today. So there might be some things in here that would go right along with the Robert L. Owen lesson, as it's another opportunity for students to interpret economic events that might have necessitated the creation of the Federal Reserve. And lastly, the Taking Informed Action section, students will research the structure of the Federal Reserve Act and how it's used to help prevent future money panics and economic crises. This will let students explore more about the Federal Reserve and see what historical events the Federal Reserve has been involved in. And then students can create a 1-minute public service announcement on how the Fed handles an economic crisis or monetary panic. There is a link to the source from the Atlanta Fed. They have a short series of videos that explains the Fed structure, origins, and functions. They're 3 to 4 minute long. So if you ever want to explain anything about the Fed, or like this one is a picture of the one that's the basic structure of the central bank, but there's some on monetary policy and all the different things if you ever need that resource. And then lastly, we have provided a rubric for a summative assessment, and I'm just showing part of it on the screen, but if that's something you need, we have that there as well. So I'm going to stop again and see if there are any questions or discussion. All right, well, if you have thoughts about how to use this in your classroom, please feel free to reach out to us or put it in the chat. Now, while you're thinking about that, if you're familiar with Fed resources, you know we have a lot of them. We have people whose job is to write curriculum across all 12 banks. So we have resources and lessons on all sorts of topics. If you visit federalreserveeducation.org, you could be overwhelmed by the amount of resources developed from each of the 12 banks. So to make it easier on you to make lesson plans and add in outside resources, we have worked to correlate the Oklahoma Social Studies standards with Fed resources so you can easily find just what you need. Of course, we still want you to call us, please, if you need assistance. But I'm going to turn it over and let Leslie jump in here to walk you through those.
Thank you, Pam. Nice job. I learned a lot about Robert L. Owen myself. So, you know, that is what I'm here for. It's to help you navigate what can be a very robust, but also at times a little bit frustrating, trying to find your personal finance or economic education resources. So that's why I'm here, one of the many reasons. But we're so excited to be able to share this with you because they're all free. And I think that's something that is just an amazing opportunity. And it's not just from the Fed in Kansas City, but it is system-wide, as Pam was talking about. So I want to be able to show you the simple navigation of what we've developed for the Oklahoma Standards for Social Studies and the document we put together to help, you know, satisfy that required expectation and evidence outcome for your students. So it begins by finding that. And the slide you're seeing now is the middle of our Oklahoma City branch webpage. You'll see a tab that says Education in Oklahoma, and you'll notice that it is broken out by pre-K through 12th grade. And in this instance, I circled 9 through 12, assuming that that is who you guys are. So we're gonna, who you're working with. So we're gonna take a little bit deeper dive into what you might expect to find there. So next slide, grades 9 through 12. There we go. What you'll find is this document that starts with this Oklahoma Social Studies standards and resources. Each grade level, as I said, has its own breakdown of the standard outcomes and the Fed lessons that pair up to satisfy those requirements. And on the right of the slide, you can see basically what are the standards for the grade level and the expectations, the outcomes, and then how we've put together curriculum resources for you. So if we go to the next slide, something to know is that it's not just a paper lesson necessarily. There are videos, there's podcasts, of course, traditional lesson plans, and it just really provides a wide variety of ways to approach any particular expectation and outcome. Makes it more interesting, lets you approach any particular topic in a multitude of ways. If we don't have a lesson to satisfy our particular evidence outcome, we don't include it. So if 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, let's say we didn't have anything to support 1.3, then we would simply skip over that. We wouldn't even put it in there because we wouldn't want to cause confusion. In this instance, I circled one of the curriculum resources that is called Cards, Cars, and Currency, an online class. So if we look at that and we go a little deeper, if you clicked on that link in our document, this is where you would go. You would go directly to the overview, and in this case, it links to register your students to Econ Lowdown. It's an online portal to teach the lesson. So let's step into previewing lesson 1, which is also circled for you. And when you click in, it shows the length of time that it's required to teach the lesson. It tells you the appropriate age range, the grade levels, and it steps you through lesson 1. In this case, it's actually using some gaming techniques. So you can kind of get a sense of what it is that is being offered on this one. If it's not to your liking, you pop back out, you choose a different one and see if it's going to work for you. So I'm not going to take you into the depths of this like Pam did with Robert L. Owen, but you can see the ease with which you're able to navigate and assess if a lesson is indeed appropriate for your students. So if we go on to the next one, I think I just wanted to show you that it just keeps going, especially for high school. It is extensive, very expansive, and there's so many opportunities within it. And the fact that we were able to simply just make it a clickable link, it really provides a much simpler way to find something that would be of use to you. I'm going to go ahead and stop here for a second. If you have any questions about the approach we're taking here, anything I can answer on that, I'd be happy to do so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn away from the Oklahoma standards because this is what you're going to see throughout, regardless of the grade that you're teaching. And we'd love for you to share this, by the way. Please do so. So let me share a few other things with you in terms of some events, some programs, some other opportunities to share with your students. Over this past summer, we had a Kansas City Fed produced live series called 21st Century Careers. And it was really fascinating because they went and found high-level speakers to start out, and then kind of narrowed and funneled down to kind of more of a hands-on approach as they developed this program. The first topic, a portrait of leadership, was actually Esther George, President Esther George at the Kansas City Fed. What was so wonderful about this is she made it so personal. And what she did was she talked about the overview of her career journey, the skills, then the characteristics that helped her to be a successful leader. She also talked to students about what she learned in terms of her role models, fellow leaders, her mentors. I think sometimes students think they have to know everything, and it's simply not true. Here is a CEO of a Federal Reserve Bank who, you know, tapped into the knowledge that other people have. And I think letting students know that that's okay is a really important thing to hear. And I think to hear it from President George is, you know, is a great opportunity for them. The other thing she talked about was the keys to their success and how students can get there. And I think she modeled that through what she told them about herself. And just for your knowledge, Esther George's complete career has been at the Federal Reserve, and she started as a bank examiner. So she has worked her way up and has used this particular model to get where she is today. The second session was called Today's Leadership Landscape. And this is something that they looked at and told the students about what the differences are in leading in a public entity, in a private corporation, and in an entrepreneurial setting. They're vastly different. I've actually worked in all of those different sectors, and it's really fascinating because you can go into one and think, I'm going to just absolutely love this, but sometimes it's not a fit. And I think showing that to students in this particular context and helping them understand that not everybody's built for bureaucracy. You know, not everybody can work in an entrepreneurial setting where it's just, you know, from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. You know, we all function in different ways with those. This particular program will help them see that and perhaps help them determine whether or not a particular job that they're interested in, because of where it's located, might not be for them. The third one we had was Skills for Success, and this is where we started to narrow the focus. Our HR team put together a session on building leadership skills, and when we talk about that, we typically talk about soft skills. Those are so important, and they're important to every organization because it's expensive to hire people, and students need to understand that those skills are highly regarded and it will take them into their future. I think, especially today with the pandemic, where students aren't having as much one-on-one interaction with their peers, with their teachers, with mentors, you know, whether in church, wherever it might be, they're just not having the same kind of interaction to where the soft skills are being honed. I think it's a really important topic for them to maybe have a little bit of view into and keep it sharp. Our last 21st Century Career Program was centered on opportunity and opportunity occupations. And this is where we kind of patted ourselves a little bit on the back and featured ourselves. These are careers that don't require a four-year college degree. So we featured some of our Fed Bank positions, and individuals who worked in those departments actually did the presentation, and what they shared was what it takes and how they got into the position, their opportunities on career trajectory. And some of those are cash services representative, facilities reps. I mean, you can imagine a Federal Reserve building, there is so much to be done, whether it's HVAC or plumbing or design. It's just so many different things. Our law enforcement personnel, they do not require a four-year college degree to be on our team. And then, of course, IT representatives. Now, some of these things might require an associate's degree or certainly certificates, but you know, it's not a four-year degree where you're indebted for quite some time typically. And just so you all know, IT is the largest department at the Kansas City Fed. We support not only the Kansas City Fed, but many of the other Federal Reserve banks in an IT capacity. So if you have students who are interested in that, that might be something to share with them. This video series is available at kansascityfed.org/education. And I believe Heather posted a bunch of different links already. So hopefully you'll have an opportunity to take a look at those. If we can go on to the next slide. And that has to do with, I just learned about this last week. We had a program last week for educators, our first of the Evening with the Fed series, and I will talk about that in a moment. But during that time, I learned about this particular tool that is actually 1 month old. The Federal Reserve Banks of Philadelphia and Cleveland came together to develop this tool called an Occupation Mobility Explorer. And basically what this tool allows is for students, or really anyone, to match current skills with future occupations where you would see at least a 10% increase in wages. So it also then will compare the top 25 most in-demand skills for any pair of occupations within a metro area. And when I say metro area, they are focusing on the top 100 metro areas. So Oklahoma City may not be in there, Tulsa may not, but you would see Kansas City, you would see a Denver, and you can look at that and still gauge what that trajectory looks like from skill to skill. The final thing that it covers is top transition, which allows users to view and sort and download data for pairs of occupations considered most similar. So if I have skill set A, B, C, and D, but I'm lacking E and F, I might be able to say, okay, I have this skill set and I want to move, I want to keep my career moving, and I'm going towards something that is a 10% pay increase, which would be fantastic, Pam, but I know that's not going to happen. At any rate, just the idea that you're starting here and you're able to know that to get to here with that 10% increase, I might need 2 more skills in my kit bag. And then you have a way to look at that and say, okay, I can go out and get this certificate, or I can go and take that online class. And all of a sudden, that skill set is filled in. And then you can use this Explorer to actually figure out, okay, now I'm in a position where I can move on. So it's a really interesting tool. I have not had a lot of time to dig into this yet, but if you would like to, you can go to philadelphiafed.org and then use their search function and type in Occupational Mobility Explorer. And I do believe we have that also in the chat feature right now. Finally, with February being Black History Month, I wanted to share another opportunity for you to share some really great information with your students. And this is a book written by Tim Todd, who is our executive speechwriter at the Kansas City Fed. And he's written numerous books for the Fed. This one happens to be called Let Us Put Our Money Together, The Founding of America's First Black Banks. There's also a supplemental lesson plan called Progress Through Parity, How Black Banks Changed the Financial Landscape. This is an incredible book and really great reading, and it might be something that you supplement your schoolwork with, but you can request a complimentary copy or even a classroom set. It's a softbound book, and if you contact Christy Bromagen at kc.frb.org, she will send it to you. You need to send in your name, your address, your organization. Again, that is in the chat feature as well. I think that Heather shared that with you. I think, you know, if you got into it now, hopefully you'd have it in time, but it may be more towards mid-February. I don't want to promise for her. So that is a really fascinating book. But next, we're going to go on to upcoming events. I happen to mention that Occupation Mobility Explorer. We learned about that in our January Evening with the Fed series. What we decided to do this year, simply because we had the opportunity because of the pandemic. You know, typically we all meet in person at the Fed, and we love that. And we love to hear from Chad one-on-one. By the way, April 7th is the Evening with the Fed series where Chad will be featured. But what we talked about, myself and the people who do my job in the other cities in the 10th district, we opted for this approach, highlighting the 10th district from Wyoming to New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, on across to Missouri, you know, Kansas, Oklahoma. And it was just this unique opportunity, given the pandemic, of how we're all adjusting to how we're presenting and receiving information. So these Zoom webinars will give you the opportunity to not only look in depth at what we typically talk about, which is energy and the economy, but also hear from Chad's counterparts, executives from Denver and Omaha, whose areas of expertise, in this case, are climate risks and agriculture. And then in May, from President Esther George, she's actually going to take us and look at the impact that COVID has had and the economic recovery. And with a new incoming administration and new Janet Yellen and different people, it will continue to evolve. And I think it's a really rich contextual information that your students would be able to learn a lot from. So to register for those, go to kansascityfed.org/events. You can register for all of them at once. And it will also give you a deeper dive into what is each topic is really covering, and you can take a look at that. If you can't attend, that's okay. We are recording them. But if you do attend, actually, we are selecting 12 winners during each. I think it's 12 during each series. If you attended for each meeting, we'll select some winners, and we'll be sending you out a wonderful little gift package. There is no fee to attend, and you will receive a certificate of completion once the series concludes in May. So something to look forward to, and I hope you'll share that out as well. Other programs at the Fed, if we can move forward, coming up in April is our Outstanding Economic Student Award. This is a partnership we do with the Oklahoma Council on Economic Education. Really wanted to tell you about this today, especially because it's almost like once January hits, the rest of the school year just accelerates so quickly. And it's hard sometimes for you to take the time to look at your students and say, who is my student who really has this economic way of thinking? One student per school can be nominated by a teacher or an administrator. We will be sending out that application process hopefully soon, probably within the next month. And we want you to seriously consider who you would nominate. We want students to still have, you know, a year that'll be memorable for them in a more positive way. So this is one of those opportunities. Hopefully you'll take the time to consider who might be an exceptional candidate for your group. Secondly, and I can't even believe I'm talking about this, is the Student Board of Directors application process will open sometime this spring, close to summer probably. This is a really robust program. This will be for the 2021-2022 school year. We just finished session 4 of 6 sessions with this year's student board cohort. We cover topics such as personal finance, personal branding, business etiquette, how to have a crucial conversation. We have them go through a Strength Finders course, and we talk about that in depth. This coming month in February, we are going to meet with the Thunder administrative staff. Normally we do that in person, and it is a highlight because they get to tour the arena, and they don't get to meet players, but they do have a fabulous lesson from them that's all about local and regional economies. They will meet with our board of directors, and of course they learn quite a bit of the history and the role of the nation's central bank, the Fed, during this entire 6-month process. It is a really robust program. It gives them an incredible amount of insight into the business world and an opportunity to develop relationships and connect and start a network with some business professionals who are nothing if not gracious to say, please, please, please connect with me, because they want to share their knowledge and they want to help guide them should they want that from them. So as you look for that, I will be sending that out to schools and educators probably late April would be my guess. So look for that and please share it with your students. It is a rather lengthy application process, but once it's in, we move pretty quick after that. So finally, I guess you just need to know how to get a hold of us. Heather was kind enough to post quite a bit of these individual how to connect with us, but remember that kcfed.org/education, federalreserveeducation.org, kansascityfed.org/Oklahoma City. Those are going to take you to a lot of the educational programs that we talked about today. And then if you have questions, please just contact Pam or myself. Our emails are on the screen, and we are happy to help in any way we can. And again, thank you for attending our session. The Fed always appreciates the opportunity to spend some time showcasing what it is we do and the resources that we have that are, of course, always free for your use. So thank you. And Pam, I'm going to pitch it back to you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Leslie. Thanks for going through all that stuff. Good stuff. Now, since it's our branch centennial, that's provided us an opportunity to explore the history of our branch's creation. So there's one more little thing that I just want to tempt you with. So if you want to learn more just kind of about the history of the Oklahoma City branch and about the argument to decide which city would be the 3rd branch of the 10th Federal Reserve District, and spoiler alert, it was a fight between Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and Wichita. If you want any of that kind of stuff, we have a Centennial page on kansascityfed.org/Oklahoma City that Leslie's worked really hard on. And so please check that out. There's the history of the Oklahoma City branch itself that you might find an interesting read as well. So did anybody have any other questions or comments? I appreciate all the comments in the chat. Thank you guys for being engaged.
Pam, something I might mention about that Centennial website, because I did notice while you were speaking, some of the educators mentioned that students really enjoy visuals, some pictures and things like that. We have a lot of pictures. I think there's 50 or 60 from the beginning of the Fed in Oklahoma City, and they're really fun to take a look at and just see how people lived compared to what we do today. So that's kind of a nice little feature within that as well.
Yes, and I'd love to talk about the Oklahoma City branch and its history and all this stuff. So if you want to talk about it, please call me. So I think I just want to thank you for being here today to talk about, our great Oklahoman Robert L. Owen and learn about Fed resources. So once again, I'll just reiterate what Leslie said, to reach out to us if we can be of service, and I'll just turn it back over to Heather. Thank you.
All right. I think that's all we have. Just check one more time. Does anybody have any questions? There's several postings on here for the attendance. Make sure that you click on that and kind of register. If anybody needs anything, let us know. And that's all we've got. Have a good evening. Thanks, everybody.